When you look at South Africa's economy, it's a real paradox. On one hand, you've got these really deep-rooted challenges. But on the other, some of the world's smartest investors are, well, incredibly optimistic. So today, we're going to try and unpack this economic puzzle. So, this is really the big question we're tackling. What on earth are these investors seeing that maybe the rest of us are missing? Why is all this global capital suddenly pouring into a country with so many well-known problems? Let's dive in and see if we can solve this mystery. And look, this isn't just some random chatter. This confidence is coming from the heavy hitters. We're talking about firms like BlackRock. This quote right here from their chief strategist, Ben Powell, really just frames the whole argument perfectly. As investors get a little nervous about U.S. government debt, they start looking around for other places to put their money, and South Africa is popping up right at the top of their list. All right, first up, let's talk about this surprising investor bet. We're going to follow the money and see exactly why global capital is flowing into South Africa, and maybe more importantly, where it's actually going. It really boils down to some pretty simple math. Investors are always chasing returns or yield. And right now, South African government bonds are offering nearly 9%. That's more than double what you'd get from a U.S. Treasury bond. And get this, with South African inflation projected to fall, the real return, that's the money you actually make after you account for inflation, is looking very, very attractive. And this isn't just a theoretical thing. The money is really pouring in. So far this year, foreign investors have bought over 90 billion rand worth of South African government bonds. That is a massive vote of confidence in the country's ability to pay back its debts. But, and here's the paradox again, while that 90 billion rand was flowing into bonds, a staggering 11.3 billion US dollars flowed out of the country's stock market. So what does that tell us? It suggests that investors are betting on the government's stability, but maybe they're a little more hesitant about the growth prospects of actual South African companies. Interesting, right? And this optimism isn't just happening in the financial markets. I mean, look at these huge corporate moves. Amazon is building new data centers. Walmart is finally opening its first ever branded stores there. And maybe the biggest deal of all, the state power utility Eskom has actually stabilized the power grid. As one expert put it, if the lights stay on, the capital will come back. So let's zoom in from that huge global picture to a really fantastic story of resilience on the ground. Because it's not just foreign investors who see potential, it's being seized by local entrepreneurs too. So this is the story of Old School, a sports merchandise company started by two brothers in, of all places, a dorm room. It literally started with an Instagram giveaway for a vintage rugby jersey that didn't even exist yet. That little spark led to a business that grew an incredible 20-fold during the 2023 Rugby World Cup. But their journey was about to take a very unexpected turn. Okay, this is where their guts and smarts really shine. The day before opening their flagship store, they get a legal threat from the South African Rugby Union. One of the founders called it one of the worst days of my life. Can you imagine? But they didn't back down. They opened the store, met with the union, and argued that they were actually filling a gap in the market. And believe it or not, that terrifying legal threat turned into their single biggest partnership. What a story. So, we've seen global confidence and we've seen local hustle, but let's zoom back out to the national level and take a look at the government's finances, because, well, this is where the puzzle gets really, really complex. So on one hand, we've got some fantastic news. The South African Revenue Service, or SARS, is having a great year. As you can see, tax collections are up across the board. Personal income tax up nearly 8%. The fuel levy up over 12%. And value-added tax, or VAT, is up a massive 12.2%. That's more than double what they projected for the entire year. Part of this is because SARS is just getting much better at closing the country's huge tax gap. But this brings us to that central contradiction again. The government is collecting more tax money than ever before, yet it's also sinking deeper and deeper into debt. So how is that even possible? Well, this number is the reason why. The national debt stands at a staggering 5.8 trillion rand. For years now, the government has been projecting that its debt would stabilize, but that target just keeps getting pushed back and back because spending continues to outpace even these record-breaking tax collections. So with debt this high, where does a turnaround even begin? Well, a really critical first step is rebuilding international trust.
And that brings us to a huge piece of good news that could be a genuine game changer for the country's global standing.
So first, what exactly is this gray list? Well, it's kept by the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, and it's basically a global watch list for countries that aren't doing enough to stop dirty money. And being on it makes doing international business way slower, more expensive, and just a lot more difficult. And the big news is this. After being put on the list back in early 2023, South Africa has worked really hard to close those loopholes, and it has now officially been taken off. This is a massive, massive win. And this isn't just symbolic. It has real-world consequences. It reinforces that investor optimism we were talking about earlier, and it signals to the entire world that government reforms are actually working. It can even lower the cost of government borrowing and just make it easier for everyone to do business across borders. Okay, let's try and bring all these contradictory pieces together. We've seen big global bets, inspiring local success, a really puzzling fiscal situation, and now a major boost to the country's global standing. South Africa really is at a crossroads. It really all boils down to two competing stories, doesn't it? On one side, you have these promising green shoots popping up, high bond yields pulling in money, amazing entrepreneurs like the old school guys, and huge wins like getting off that FATF gray list. But on the other side, you've got the deep roots of these long-standing problems, just massive government debt, money leaving the stock market, and really low economic growth that could force tax hikes down the road. Which brings us to our final question. Is this new momentum, these green shoots of optimism and progress, are they strong enough to finally break through the hard ground of the country's oldest economic challenges? That, right there, is the multi-trillion rand question, and the answer is going to define South Africa's future.